Welcome, parents. Look, if you're tuning in to this explainer, chances are you know that sudden stomach-dropping moment all too well. You touch your little one's forehead and, oh no, they feel way too warm. It's incredibly stressful, right? Well, today we're going to replace that late-night panic with pure clinical clarity. We're stripping away all the myths and looking directly at the actual clinical standards for pediatric temperatures. So by the time we wrap up, you'll have a rock-solid, data-driven game plan for the next time your child feels a bit under the weather. Let's just dive right into the big question. We have literally all done it, the classic back of the hand to the forehead test. It's basically a parental reflex at this point. But is that warm forehead actually a fever? Well, the truth is, relying on touch alone is incredibly unreliable. I mean, think about it. Skin temperature can be thrown off by the room getting hot, how many extra blankets they're bundled under, or even if they were just running around the living room like crazy. To really know what's going on with our child's health, we have to move past the hand test and rely on hard clinical facts. We need accurate tools and precise numbers. And that brings us to the absolute most important number you need to know: 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, or 38 degrees Celsius. Seriously, burn this number into your memory. According to pediatric clinical standards, this is the definitive threshold for a fever when taken via the rectal method. And honestly, that method is considered the absolute gold standard for measurement. Anything below 100.4 in that context is just not clinically classified as a fever. Getting the standard straight right out of the gate is a total game changer because it immediately stops us from panicking over minor temperature swings. But before we can completely understand fevers, we've got to understand the baseline. Let's look at section 1, what is normal? It's actually fascinating to compare standard adult temperatures with what is perfectly normal for a kid. We usually just assume that classic 98.6 degrees applies universally to everyone, right? But biologically, a child's normal body temperature is actually higher than ours. If you take a normal rectal measurement on a totally healthy child, it naturally sits anywhere between 97 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 36.1 to 37.8 degrees Celsius. So say your toddler is resting at 99.5 degrees. Your first instinct might be to worry, but the data actually tells us they are well within their normal, healthy biological range. And this brings up another super important factor: the time of day. Our bodies aren't static thermostats. They go through what we call diurnal variations. Basically, a child's body temperature naturally dips to its lowest point in the middle of the night and early morning, specifically between midnight and 6 a.m. But on the flip side, it naturally peaks and hits its maximum in the late afternoon and early evening, between 1700 and 1900 hours, so right around 5 to 7 p.m. If your little one feels a bit flushed right in the middle of the dinnertime chaos, it is completely biologically normal and definitely not an immediate reason to sound the alarm. So understanding that baseline is half the battle. The other half is knowing how to actually measure it properly. Let's move into section 2, age-based measurement methods. Let's build out our practical toolkit. As we established, the rectal method is the gold standard. But let's be real here. Wrestling a sick, squirming toddler to take a rectal temperature? Yeah, not exactly a walk in the park. Thankfully, clinical standards absolutely recognize this and provide alternatives based on your child's age. If your kiddo is under 4 or 5 years old, the axillary or armpit method is your go-to alternative. Since it's an external measurement, it averages about 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit lower than a rectal reading. Because of that, the clinical fever threshold for an armpit reading is anything over 99 degrees Fahrenheit or 37.2 Celsius. Now, if they're older than 4 or 5, they're usually cooperative enough for the oral method. Oral temperatures average about half a degree to 1 degree lower than a rectal. So a fever taken in the mouth is defined as anything over 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit or 37.5 Celsius. Think of these numbers as your ultimate cheat sheet. Different ages need different methods, and those methods have slightly different panic points. Of course, knowing the method doesn't do you much good if you don't have the right hardware. That brings us to section 3, choosing the right thermometer. Picking the right tool is just as crucial as the measurement method itself. So let's break down the accepted options based directly on clinical standards. First up, we've got standard digital thermometers. These are fantastic because they're super versatile. You can use them in the mouth, the armpit, or for a rectal reading. They're definitely the most common devices out there, but just a quick heads up, they can be prone to calibration errors over time. Next are digital ear thermometers. Now, these are amazing because they're lightning fast and give a really solid estimate of the body's core temperature. The downside, they do tend to be a bit more on the expensive side. Finally, forehead infrared thermometers. You definitely saw these everywhere used for mass screening during the COVID pandemic, right? The key thing to remember with these is that the temperature they read is considered equivalent to an armpit temperature. But here's the catch for getting a reliable read. You have to hold it exactly 2 inches away from the forehead. Any closer or further and your reading is going to be completely skewed. Okay, I need your full attention for this next part. These are the tools that you absolutely should not use. First up, mercury thermometers. Those vintage glass ones are simply no longer recommended by any clinical standards. The risk of them breaking and spilling toxic mercury is just way too high. If you still have one hiding in your medicine cabinet, please throw it out safely. Second, forehead strip thermometers. You know those little plastic strips that magically change color when you press them to your kid's brow? They might seem super convenient when you're desperate in the middle of the night, but the clinical data is crystal clear. They are highly inaccurate and absolutely not recommended for assessing a fever. When it comes to your child's health, we literally cannot compromise on accuracy. Which brings us right to the end of this explainer. And I really want to leave you with this final thought. Now that you actually know the numbers, the natural daily variations, and the specific clinical tools you need, are you ready to ditch those forehead strips and trust the data? The next time your child feels a little too warm at 2 in the morning, you don't need to guess, and you definitely don't need to panic. You have the exact thresholds and the proper methods to figure out exactly what's going on. Trust the science, trust your tools, and most importantly, take a deep breath. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and stay curious out there.